My name is Isabella Morrow, and I restore broken things for a living. Art restoration, to be precise. I lived in Savannah, Georgia, in one of those gorgeous Victorian houses in the historic district where the azaleas bloom like pink clouds every spring and the Spanish moss whispers secrets in the evening breeze. Fitting, really, that I'd end up surrounded by beautiful facades hiding ugly truths underneath. For 15 years, I thought I had the perfect marriage. My husband, Jake, was a successful chef who owned 3 upscale restaurants in Savannah's downtown district. Morrow's Kitchen, the Copper Table, and Moonlight and Magnolias, each one more successful than the last. Jake had this incredible gift for making people feel special, whether it was through his food or just his presence. When he walked into a room, people gravitated toward him like moths to flame. I spent my days in my restoration studio, carefully peeling away layers of time and neglect from damaged paintings, bringing forgotten masterpieces back to life. There's something almost sacred about that work, taking something beautiful that's been hurt and making it whole again. I never imagined I'd need those same skills to put my own life back together. Jake and I met at an art gallery opening downtown. He was catering the event, and I was there because one of my restored pieces was being unveiled. He approached me with a glass of champagne and the most charming smile I'd ever seen, saying he'd been watching me admire my own work and found my humility fascinating. Most artists can't resist bragging about their talent, he said, but you look at your restoration like you're seeing it for the first time. That should have been my first clue about Jake's talent for observation, for reading people, for knowing exactly what to say to make someone fall in love with him. We were married within 2 years, and for 13 years after that, I believed we were living a fairy tale. Jake would surprise me with romantic dinners at his restaurants after closing, cooking just for me while I told him about the paintings I was working on. He'd listen to every detail, how I'd discovered a hidden signature under layers of overpaint, how I'd mixed the perfect shade to match an original pigment from the 1800s. He was always so interested in my work, always asking questions. Who's commissioning this piece? How much is something like this worth? Do you ever work on pieces for private collectors? I thought it was beautiful how invested he was in my passion. But let me tell you something about deception. The best liars don't tell lies. They tell selective truths and let you fill in the blanks with your own assumptions. The first crack in my perfect world appeared 3 months ago on a Thursday evening in March. I'd been working late in my studio trying to finish a particularly challenging restoration of a 19th century portrait. The painting had been severely damaged in a house fire, and the family was eager to have their ancestors' image saved before their upcoming reunion. I'd lost track of time, completely absorbed in carefully removing soot stains from the subject's face. When I realized it was nearly midnight, Jake would be closing the restaurant soon, and I wanted to surprise him by showing up to walk home together, something we used to do early in our marriage, but had gotten away from as our careers demanded more time. I packed up my materials and drove to Moonlight and Magnolias, his newest and most upscale restaurant. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed Jake's car was still there, along with one other vehicle, a sleek black Mercedes I didn't recognize. The restaurant's main lights were off, but I could see a warm glow coming from the private dining room in the back. I used my key to enter through the side door, the one that led directly to Jake's office. I was planning to surprise him, maybe convince him to cook us a late dinner with whatever ingredients were left in the kitchen. But as I walked down the hallway toward the private dining room, I heard voices. Jake's voice, and a woman's voice I didn't recognize. I stopped walking and listened. The Degas pastel will be the crown jewel of the collection, the woman was saying. My client is willing to pay $2 million, but only if the provenance documentation is flawless. Isabella's work is impeccable, Jake replied. She doesn't just restore the pieces, she creates complete historical narratives for them. Birth certificates for artwork, you could say. No one questions her authentication when she signs off on a piece. My blood went cold. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to hear more. And she has no idea what she's really documenting? The woman asked. Jake laughed. Not his warm, loving laugh, but something cold and calculating I'd never heard before. Isabella sees what she wants to see. She's so passionate about saving damaged art that she never questions where it comes from or where it's going. I tell her a piece belonged to some family who needs money or that it's being donated to a museum, and she believes every word. Brilliant, the woman said. Using your wife's expertise and reputation to authenticate stolen artwork. How long have you been running this operation? About 5 years now. Started small with pieces that wouldn't be missed, but we've graduated to much bigger game. That Monet she authenticated last month, it was stolen from a private collector in Paris 3 years ago. Isabella's documentation made it completely legitimate for resale. I felt like I was going to be sick. 5 years. 5 years of my expertise, my reputation, my careful work being used to help criminals sell stolen art. Every piece I lovingly restored, thinking I was preserving history and beauty. I'd actually been helping thieves profit from their crimes. But that wasn't even the worst part. What about after the Degas sale? The woman asked. Are you ready to make the transition we discussed? More than ready, Jake said. 15 years of marriage to Isabella has been profitable, but I'm tired of pretending. Once we close this deal, I'll have enough money to disappear with you. We can start fresh somewhere new, maybe that villa in Tuscany you showed me. And Isabella? There was a long pause. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was so cold, sent chills down my spine. Isabella will be devastated, of course, but she'll survive. She's tougher than she looks. Besides, by the time she figures out what's been happening, we'll be long gone, and she'll be too implicated in the art fraud to go to the authorities without destroying her own career. I stood in that hallway, listening to the man I'd loved for 15 years casually discuss destroying my life, and I felt something inside me change. Not break, change, like a piece of art that's been damaged beyond repair. Sometimes the only option is to create something entirely new from the ruins. I quietly backed out of the restaurant and drove home in a state of shock. But by the time I pulled into our driveway, shock had transformed into something much more dangerous, clarity. You see, Jake had made one crucial mistake in his assessment of me. He thought I was naive, that I saw only what I wanted to see. But he forgot that I've spent my entire career studying deception, not human deception, but artistic deception. I can spot a forgery from across a room. I can tell when someone has tried to pass off a reproduction as an original. I know how to trace the history of a piece, how to verify its authenticity, how to expose lies that have been hidden for decades. And most importantly, I know how to make something look completely authentic when it's actually a carefully crafted fake. Over the next several weeks, I became a different person. During the day, I continued my normal routine, working in my studio, having dinner with Jake, playing the role of the loving, trusting wife. But at night, while Jake thought I was sleeping, I was conducting the most important investigation of my life. I started by going through every piece I'd restored over the past 5 years, cross-referencing them with international databases of stolen artwork. What I found made me physically ill. 17 pieces, 17 beautiful works of art that I'd lovingly brought back to life were on stolen art registries from around the world. A Renaissance portrait stolen from a church in Italy. A landscape by a minor impressionist master taken from a private home in London. A collection of sketches that had disappeared from a museum in Barcelona. Piece after piece, all bearing my authentication. All sold through Jake's network of criminal contacts. But Jake's second mistake was underestimating not just my intelligence, but my connections in the art world. When you've been restoring artwork for 20 years, you develop relationships with dealers, collectors, museum curators, and, most importantly, insurance investigators who specialize in art fraud. I reached out to Rebecca Downey, an investigator I'd worked with several times over the years to authenticate pieces for insurance claims. I told her I suspected I'd been unknowingly authenticating stolen artwork and asked for her help in building a case. Isabella, she said during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from downtown Savannah, if what you're telling me is true, your husband isn't just running a small-time art fraud operation. Based on the pieces you've described, he's connected to one of the most sophisticated international art theft rings we've been tracking for years. That's when she told me about the Degas pastel, the one I'd heard Jake's mysterious partner mention that night at the restaurant. It had been stolen from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York during a carefully planned heist 2 years ago. The theft had made international headlines, and the FBI had been hunting for both the artwork and the thieves ever since. If your husband is planning to sell that to Degas, Rebecca said, he's not just committing fraud, he's trafficking in stolen cultural artifacts. That's a federal crime with serious prison time. But here's where my story takes a turn that even Jake, with all his cunning and manipulation, never saw coming. I didn't just want to expose Jake's crimes. I didn't just want to see him arrested and imprisoned. I wanted to destroy him the same way he'd planned to destroy me, slowly, carefully, and with the kind of devastating completeness that comes from using someone's own tools against them. So I started planning my revenge. First, I needed to find that Degas pastel. If Jake had it, it was probably hidden somewhere I'd never think to look. I spent days searching our house while he was at work, looking for any sign of where he might be keeping stolen artwork. Finally, I found it, not the artwork itself, but something even better. Hidden in a false bottom of Jake's desk drawer was a small notebook filled with his handwriting. Addresses, contact information, meeting times, and most importantly, a complete record of every stolen piece he'd been involved with over the past 5 years. Names of thieves, buyers, transportation methods, storage locations, everything an investigator would need to dismantle the entire operation. But the real treasure was an entry dated just 3 days earlier. Degas, Storage Unit 247, Southside Self-Storage. Final exchange with VM, Saturday, 11 p.m. VM, Victoria Matthews. I assumed, based on some other notes in the book, Jake's mysterious partner, the woman whose voice I'd heard that night at the restaurant. I photographed every page of that notebook, then carefully put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I called Rebecca. I know where the Degas is. I told her, and I know when they're planning to make the final sale. But I wasn't done. Not even close. While Rebecca coordinated with the FBI to set up surveillance on the storage facility, I began working on the second phase of my revenge. Remember, I'm an expert at restoration, but I'm also an expert at creating perfect reproductions when necessary. Sometimes a piece is too damaged to restore, but a client still wants to display something in their home or gallery. In those cases, I create what we call exhibition copies, perfect replicas that capture the spirit of the original. Over the next week, working late into the night in my studio, I created the most important reproduction of my career. Not of a painting this time, but of documents. Financial records, to be specific, bank statements, transaction histories, correspondence, all carefully crafted to show a very different version of Jake's business dealings. In my version of reality, Jake hadn't been using my authentication services unknowingly. Instead, the documents showed that I had been the mastermind all along, using Jake's restaurants as a front for my own art fraud operation. Every email, every bank transfer, every piece of correspondence was meticulously designed to paint me as a criminal genius who had been manipulating my husband for years. Why would I create evidence that implicated myself? You might ask. Because I needed Jake to find it. On Friday evening, the night before Jake's planned meeting with Victoria Matthews to finalize the Degas sale, I made sure he would discover my criminal activities. I left the forged documents in a folder on my desk in the studio, just carelessly placed enough that he'd notice them when he came to kiss me goodbye before leaving for work. I watched from the kitchen window as Jake entered my studio to look for me. I watched him notice the folder, open it, and begin reading. I watched his face change from confusion to shock to anger to something that might have been admiration. When he came back into the house, he was a different person. Gone was the loving husband facade. Instead, he looked at me with a mixture of respect and suspicion. "We need to talk," he said. "About what?" I asked innocently. "I think you know." That evening, Jake laid all his cards on the table. He told me about the art theft ring, about his plans to leave me, about the money he'd hidden away. But now, he said, he realized I'd been playing a deeper game all along. "You've been using me," he said, not angry but almost impressed. "All these years I thought I was the one manipulating you, but you've been running your own operation right under my nose." I let him believe it. I let him think I was just as corrupt as he was, just better at hiding it. I even let him believe that I wanted to partner with him and Victoria to expand our criminal enterprise. "The Degas sale tomorrow night," I said. "I want in." Saturday night arrived, and Jake drove us both to the storage facility. He was excited, talking about our future together as criminal partners, about how much money we could make, about how we'd been meant for each other all along, just not in the way he'd originally thought. Victoria Matthews was waiting for us at storage unit 247, along with two men I assumed were buyers. The Degas pastel was there, carefully wrapped and beautiful even in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the storage facility. "So you're the famous Isabella," Victoria said, looking me up and down appraisingly. "Jake's told me so much about your talents. I hope we can work together for a long time." I replied. What none of them knew was that Rebecca and a team of FBI agents were positioned around the storage facility, recording every word, every transaction, every piece of evidence they'd need to prosecute the entire ring. The sale proceeded exactly as planned. Money changed hands, the Degas changed hands, and everyone congratulated each other on a successful partnership. That's when the FBI moved in. In the chaos that followed, shouts of federal agents, and nobody move. Jake turned to me with a look of complete betrayal. "You set us up," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I did, but the documents in your studio, your own criminal activities." "Forgeries," I said. "Very good forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. I created them specifically for you to find. I needed you to trust me enough to bring me to this meeting." The look on Jake's face as he realized he'd been outmaneuvered by the woman he'd spent years deceiving was worth everything I'd been through. But I wasn't finished with my revenge yet. Over the following weeks, as Jake and his accomplices were processed through the legal system, I made sure that every detail of his betrayal became public knowledge. I gave interviews to local newspapers about how I discovered my husband's criminal activities and worked with federal investigators to bring him to justice. I made sure that everyone in Savannah's restaurant community knew exactly what Jake had been doing. His 3 restaurants, which had been built on the profits of stolen art, were seized by federal authorities. His reputation, the thing he'd valued most after money, was completely destroyed. The culinary community that had once celebrated him now treated his name like a curse. But the most beautiful part of my revenge was yet to come. Remember those forged documents I'd created to trick Jake? Well, it turned out I was better at creating fake evidence than I'd realized. So good, in fact, that I decided to put those skills to use in a different way. While Jake was sitting in federal prison awaiting trial, I used my expertise in authentication and documentation to help the FBI track down other pieces of stolen artwork that had passed through his network. Each piece I helped recover, each thief I helped identify, each victim who got their precious artwork returned. It was like restoring something beautiful that had been damaged and lost. The FBI was so impressed with my work that they offered me a consulting position as an expert in art fraud investigation. My new job? Traveling around the world, working with law enforcement agencies to authenticate recovered stolen artwork and expose criminals who traffic in cultural artifacts. Jake had spent years using my skills to help criminals profit from stolen beauty. Now I use those same skills to help return stolen beauty to its rightful owners. But perhaps the most satisfying revenge of all was what happened to Victoria Matthews. Remember her, Jake's partner in crime and romance? Well, it turns out that when facing 20 years in federal prison, people become very willing to testify against their co-conspirators in exchange for reduced sentences. Victoria didn't just implicate Jake in the art theft ring. She revealed that their entire romantic relationship had been a lie. She'd been using Jake the same way he'd been using me, manipulating his feelings to gain access to my authentication services. There had never been any real affection between them, no plans for a romantic future in Tuscany. She'd been planning to disappear with all the money and leave Jake to take the fall for their crimes. So Jake lost everything: his freedom, his businesses, his reputation, and even the woman he thought he loved, who turned out to be just another criminal using him for her own ends. As for me, I'm still living in that beautiful Victorian house in Savannah, but now it's truly mine. The gardens are more beautiful than ever, filled with flowers I chose, arranged the way I want them. My restoration studio has been expanded, and I've never been happier with my work. I've learned that some things, once broken, can't be restored to their original condition. But sometimes, if you're skilled enough and patient enough, you can create something even more beautiful from the pieces that remain. Jake will be eligible for parole in 12 years. By then, I'll be living a life so rich and fulfilling that his betrayal will seem like nothing more than a dark period in an otherwise beautiful story, like the soot stains I removed from that portrait 3 months ago, when I first discovered what my husband really was. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I prefer to think of it as a masterpiece that takes time, skill, and patience to create properly. And like all my best work, this restoration of my life, my dignity, and my future will last forever. The art of deception, it turns out, is nothing compared to the art of justice. And I've always been very, very good at my art. If you enjoy the story and believed Isabella's revenge to Jake was his best meal ever, served cold, consider subscribing to the channel. Ring the notification bell to get notified of new revenge stories I drop every day. You don't want to miss. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video up on your screen right now.